All right, good morning. Sorry we're running behind this morning. I had a little situation to deal with over here, but it's taken care of and we are live. Good morning, Cameron. How you doing today, brother?
Good morning, good morning. I am well. How are you this morning?
Just fine, just fine. So, I know what you probably expected us to be talking about today, all things considered, and I'm tired of them. So we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. It's a topic that's interesting, a topic that I'm interested in, and frankly, I'm tired of talking about the latest Dindu every frickin' day. I don't want to let the enemy Democrats frickin' hijack my show with their bullshit narratives anymore. It's aggravating me to death. We might highlight some of the stories that are running rapid right now tomorrow during Firearms Friday, but today
we're just taking a break from it.
Yep. And I want to do more stuff like this anyway, because for one, not only is it very interesting, our UFO show did very well. So I want to do more and more of that. So we're talking about artificial intelligence, and I've got one article here that I find interesting, but before we get into that, let's talk about what artificial intelligence is and what it isn't, what we thought it was going to be and what it's turning out to be. So of course, I mean, I know Cameron has seen many of the Terminator movies. I haven't seen them all, but I've seen the relevant ones several times. And, you know, Skynet is one of the big spookies as we talk toward, hey, Matt Parks is with us and went straight for Skynet, my man. Skynet it's scary, but have you ever dug into theories like the Singularity or the gray goo, Cameron?
Oh, yes, of course. I'm a giant sci-fi nerd.
Yes.
Of course I have dug into both.
So, for the audience, the Singularity has been referred to recently in various media, and it seems to have changed. What people think of now as the Singularity seems to have mutated, and I don't quite recognize the conversation that's happening around it, because it seems like the current use of the phrase refers to a point of development, whereas the original usage of the word by futurists and technologists suggested that we reach a point eventually where technology advances so rapidly that it's no longer possible to advance technology without integrating it biologically. So it goes back to, oh God, now I can't remember the name of the theory, but there is a theory, there's an algorithm that predicts the rate of advancement, and it's a differential algorithm, like trying to calculate the amount of rocket fuel used to get a rocket off the planet Earth. It's not enough to say we need X amount of fuel. It's the question is actually, okay, as the rocket moves, it burns fuel. As it burns fuel, the fuel load gets lighter, which means the entire load gets lighter, which means you require less and less energy to move the rocket, the more fuel it burns. And that's a pretty complex differential equation, right? Similarly, with the rate at which the geometric rate of progression at which rapidly increasing rate of communication technology increases the rate at which that technology accelerates. There's a point at which it's no longer possible for communication to occur more rapidly unless it's actually integrated into the human biology, because you reach the point where the next fastest communication is instantaneous. And of course, once you hit instantaneous, hey, Steve said that's Moore's law. Yes, thank you. So, So yeah, Moore's law defines that escalation. The singularity is the point at which we're all integrated with one another by instantaneous integrated communication. If we get to that point, I'll say if we get to that point, because there is a chance that we wipe out enough of ourselves in a nuclear war that we at least forestall that eventuality. But assuming we get to that point of the singularity where we're all instantaneously connected to one another, imagine how being integrated in that way, and that including government-controlled artificial intelligence, that's a terrifying future. Cameron?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you'd asked me a question. I thought we were getting back to.
No, you're pretty reliable about being ready for a comment if I stop for a moment. So I thought I'd breathe for a second since I've been running my mouth for 5 minutes and see if you had something.
Well, okay. So let's just back up a couple of steps and just define what artificial intelligence is and what it is not. For the longest time, you are correct. We thought of artificial intelligence, and it would come in two flavors. It would be HAL 9000, or it would be Data from Star Trek.
Right.
That it would be some type of machine that also possessed some type of self-awareness. And believe it or not, that's an incredibly tough nut to crack. Even the most advanced AI, like Watson, went on Jeopardy and smoked everybody. And that's all well and good, but it had to specifically be programmed to go on Jeopardy and smoke everybody.
Right.
It did not choose to go on Jeopardy. And it did not know the difference between Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. And this seems like, a relatively minor distinction, but it's huge. The self-awareness component is the toughest nut to crack. And I don't know that it ever does get cracked, because how do you teach a thing it exists in time and space if it's not already aware of the fact that it exists in time and space? Anybody with children has seen their kids go through this. They literally figure out their fingers and their toes, and that they can maneuver their body in certain ways to get the things that they want. If they crawl over to the toy or whatever.
Yeah. The wife and I were talking about this in much less significant detail, but just the other day, she and I were sitting in the driveway having a conversation, and our almost 2-year-old Eleanor comes out and she sets down a chair, right? It's a little bitty folding chair that's her size. She sets it down, and then she walks around in front of the chair, and she's a good 3 or 4 feet away from the chair, and she's backing up to it to sit down. And we were talking about, one of the things about raising babies that's just hilarious to me is watching them learn the things that I can't remember learning. Because at some point in my past, I learned how to sit down in a chair. Today, it's not even a thing I consider doing, but there was a point at which I didn't know how to do it. I didn't have an immediate, natural as breathing ability to judge the distance the chair was behind me without putting my hand, so on and so forth. And, watching a kid learn how to tie their shoes. I know I learned how to tie shoes at some point. I don't really remember doing that, and then ask yourself, could you tell somebody how to walk? And now, describing to an adult who has walked and cannot walk now, or even who has walked and can walk now, describing to an adult how one walks is one thing. I mean, can you articulate sufficiently to make it an acquirable skill to another person how one walks? That's a very difficult question to answer. And there are many other things which defy description in the same way. One of the things which is slowed or hindered the development of artificial intelligence is sight. Sure, you can hook a camera up to a computer, but that camera basically records light at various levels of brightness, and it records colors, which a complex artificial intelligence can then extrapolate into shapes. But think about the number of things that you see with your eyes, or more correctly, the number of things which are in front of your eyes and generating sufficient light to be collected that you ignore to such an extent that you're not even aware that they're there to be ignored, because what you see is defined by what you accept in your ontology to even be a part of existent reality. That's one of the things that slowed down AI substantially, is just trying to create the ability for a computer to see.
Just as a point of fact, they can, in fact, describe to people in great detail how to walk. It's how certain types of physical therapy work. Now, and it's fascinating to hear these people talk about it. I don't think you had a class with her, but there was a girl in our high school that got into a car crash and was out of school for like 6 weeks. I mean, and it was awful. And she spoke very frankly when she came back to class about how, I never thought before when you walk, you have to turn your ankle a certain way and you have to move your hips a certain way. I've literally had to relearn all of that and still have to think about it even now as I move around. So the possibility does exist, but it's incredibly complicated. But even in that case, she's still aware of herself in time and space, and yeah. And then the other thing with regard to sight, like it's like you said, oh, okay, well, fine, just stick a camera on it. Well, if it was that simple, we'd have done it a long time ago. And we can stick cameras on things all the time. But we learn both through experience and somewhat instinctually to kind of filter out the visual noise. As you're driving down the road, you have to pay attention to many things, sure. But there's also a lot of things that you need to ignore. You don't need to soak up every teeny tiny detail while you're driving, or you're going to get somebody killed. And AI cannot make that distinction. AI, at best, while we had all of these extremely positive and extremely negative potential interpretations of it, AI, at best, is pattern recognition software.
Right. And now, machine learning can take us a long way there. I wouldn't go so far as you just did to say AI cannot make those distinctions. I would say that in its current iteration, we're not there. But as you and I have talked about before, I was doing an astronomy study at one point, and I worked on a computer program that was based in machine learning, whose job it was to identify galactic photography from the Hubble. So we got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of photographs of heretofore unidentified or even undesignated galaxies. So basically it's just a photograph, and they're relatively low resolution photographs, black and white, but you can see the shape of the galaxy. If it's a large enough galaxy, you can see some of the larger individual stars. And prior to designing the software, so to be clear, I was part of a contest where we were one of the top softwares, but we were not the winner, but our final product was a contributor to the eventual final product that was a result of the competition. But prior to the competition that generated the software that's used now, when an astronomer or an astrologist wanted to study an astrophysicist, people that look at stars, when one of these guys wanted to do a study of any kind of galaxies, they would want to study the attributes and aspects of a certain type of galaxy, a sombrero galaxy or a spiral galaxy or a lenticular galaxy, et cetera, et cetera. And the Hubble's feeding us back hundreds of thousands of pictures of galaxies, but it's just a picture of a galaxy. So for somebody who wanted to study just lenticular, they would have to go and look at the hundreds of thousands of, before they could do anything, they'd have to go and look at all those pictures and say, okay, I want this one, but not that one. I want that one, but not this one. And our program, you fed them in one side and it spat out the other side with labels. This is a 7-arm spiral. This is a lenticular. This is a sombrero. And that was just straight pattern recognition from a machine learning software. And the way that worked is basically we fed them in, it took its best guess, and then we told it was wrong, and then it reread them based on what we told it was wrong and learned from that. So, but even there, what you're talking about is a sort of artificial intelligence where the development of the artificial intelligence still requires interaction with human intelligence. Yes, Steve, sombrero galaxies, they're a thing. But you're still talking about a system that requires input from human intelligence to refine its functional reliability. Basically, it needs real eyes to make it work.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the
just
problem.
for Steve, here's a picture of a sombrero galaxy.
But I think that's going to be one of the real problems with AI, just because without some kind of biological interaction, and it could even be that cyborgs are the first true AI that actually works as we think of cyborgs, as we think of AI, rather. Like, it won't be Skynet that makes cyborgs. It'll be the cyborgs are Skynet. One of the things about the character of Data from Star Trek is a big deal was made out of the fact that he had this thing referred to as a positronic brain, as in he had a brain.
Right.
And one of those is required for consciousness and awareness.
And real quick, Cameron, I'm not as big a Star Trek nerd as you are. I actually mean that as a compliment in this context, but more importantly, with Data and his positronic brain, I know eventually in the story, Data gets his hands on a chip that allows him to have emotions as well. But with the positronic brain, is Data also a computer separate from the like if you took the positronic brain out, would Data still be a functional computer? Or is the positronic brain the entirety of the computer? Was that a distinction that was made?
It's not something that they went into terribly deeply, but Data's consciousness, as it were, seems to be stored in the brain area. He talks at length about remembering when he first came online and going through a distinct childhood phase, and his positronic brain continues to make connections very similar to how a human brain continues to make connections all throughout his life.
And the reason I ask, wax a little philosophic here, the location of the mind, we're talking about human physiology and human neurobiology now. The location of the mind is not necessarily physically in the brain, and this is some heady, complex stuff to try to get your head around. Philosophers do make a distinction between, you talk about the mind, the body, and the soul. The mind is not the same as the brain. We tend to think of the mind, where we do our thinking, as being located in the brain, but there's something else, something external and ephemeral about what the mind does. And it's a complex philosophical problem, and that's important because part of the problem with artificial intelligence and the question of whether or not an artificially intelligent construct like Data, for example, could have a soul gets wrapped up in this philosophical conundrum of whether or not the soul and the mind are the same thing, or are they two separate things. So, are we talking about an entity that's made up of a tripartite, a mind, body, and soul, or is it a mind, a soul, a brain, and a body? Is there a fourth item in there? So with data, if there's a computer that's separate from the positronic brain, which is theoretically the mind, that actually does some interesting things to the metaphor of the separation between mind and body.
Huh. So, okay. But before we go way deep into all that, you did bring up the article, and there's a piece of this that I think should be talked about.
So this is okay. Well, go ahead, and I'll go ahead and put the article on the screen for everybody.
So the European Union is regulating the use of AI, and okay, fine. They feel the need to do it, whatever. But there's only a couple of specific things that have been addressed, as far as I can tell. Things like a social credit score and facial recognition software and all that. And yeah, there's definitely room for huge abuses in those areas with AI. But honestly, so what? What good is this going to do in our modern world? Like, for example, when we were kids, we would joke that the government would put chips in us and track us everywhere we go. Well, now we don't need to do that. We all walk around with a smartphone, and the smartphone has not only our location, but our hobbies, our interests, our financial data, and for many of us, even biometric data. The government doesn't need to forcefully track us. It can now just take advantage of a system that's already in place. So when you start talking about the AI and algorithms and stuff like that, okay, you shouldn't use AI for a social credit score. I can get on board with that concept, but it kind of already exists, like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all of that. They promote and demote content based on your input with the algorithm. And then B, there's certain things that are verboten that you're just not allowed to talk about.
Right.
Like if we mention certain things about frogs having erections, this video will get knocked off of YouTube. And the AI is tracking that.
In fairness, Cameron, since we are talking about the very left-wing European Union and their attempt to try and get control of something that already exists, or your point being that the cat's out of the bag, something already exists. In fairness, that a thing already exists, for example, a human life, has never stopped the leftist from seeking to destroy it.
Well played, sir. Well played.
And Steve says, yeah, every day I want that mountaintop property a little bit more. Steve, brother, the slow red pilling of Tim Pool has been an absolute privilege to watch. And right after the riots started last year, all of a sudden Tim Pool comes out and does a video, and he says, all right, guys, so here's what happened. I bought a bunch of guns and a chunk of property that's so large that if I can see you from my front porch, you are on my land in a castle doctrine state. In a castle doctrine state. Just saying. Like, damn, son.
See, but now we're at the point where getting that mountaintop property in and of itself is going to be a red flag. I don't know how you put this genie back in the bottle.
Ooh. I'm going to glance over that, actually.
Actually, no, there's one possible way we could actually start enforcing Section 230. There you go. The European Union didn't need to come up with all of these brand new regulations. We've already got one that works extremely well. Section
okay, so
230.
Here's the problem with what you're saying there. The idea of enforcing Section 230. It's not that law enforcement or the government is not enforcing Section 230. The problem is because Section 230 defines who is protected against certain types of lawsuits. It does not say that certain kinds of activities taken by these entities are criminal. So basically, what it means is that if Twitter wants to ban you for something that makes it the case that Section 230 says that this is not a case under which you are protected if you ban somebody, then Twitter doesn't, the police don't go and arrest somebody at Twitter for breaking the law. What Section 230 does is it says if Twitter bans you and then you sue them and they can show that under Section 230 they have not banned you unreasonably or inappropriately, then on those grounds the judge can dismiss the case without having to hear it. So the problem is not that 230 isn't enforced, it's that not enough people anyway, are actually suing these media platforms for what's happening. One of the things that has actually really bothered me, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something we should have done a whole show about by now, and I apologize for being lax on that. When Donald Trump was banned by frickin' everybody, the very first thing that should have happened immediately was he should have filed massive lawsuits against every single entity that banned him. And that would have been beautiful, entertaining, and it would have been devastating to all of those platforms, because that would have set the precedent showing, look, here is where you have gone beyond your Section 230 protection. So because of the kind of law that Section 230 is, a platform like Facebook or Twitter, they can't actually violate Section 230. It's not a law that can be violated. It's not a prohibitive law. It's a prescriptive law. It says that if you do X, Y, and Z, then you're not protected against lawsuits that allege that you have violated other laws. So if somebody comes at you for defamation and it can be shown that your removal of their material wasn't in good faith, then you don't have the protection from that defamation suit, and you have to go through that process. It's an unfortunately complex legal process. So maybe there is some room there to make an argument that a separate law would be useful to be an actual prohibitive law that says if you, the platform, as defined by Section 230 and protected, assuming non-interference of an editorial nature, should take these specific actions which are violative of the First Amendment, then you are in violation of the law and subject to a penalty of, X amount of fine, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there is room for something like that.
Well, unfortunately, buddy, I'm already I'm over. I have to go get it.
I understand. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. Let me know. Definitely leave a comment under the show after it's been side posted, so that tell me if you liked it. Tell me if this is this the kind of content that you're interested in going forward. I want to spend less and less time on the BLM narrative. I don't want my show to be that. And there's a lot of stuff going on that we can talk about that's relevant to politics and the news that's interesting. And just like this AI thing, just like our UFO show the other day did very well, I would love to talk more and more about how technology affects politics and the development of our country and our society. So let me know what you think about this, and we will see you tomorrow for Firearms Friday. Love you. Be safe out there.